right, so I guess we can just go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Julia here from Quad Education. We're a college admissions company dedicated to helping deserving students get into the school of their dreams. Got a really exciting webinar here for you today, all about how to get into an Ivy League or Ivy Plus school. And we're joined with some really awesome panelists who I will let them introduce them to you in a second. But first, just some housekeeping things. I'm going to go over the agenda really quickly. So we're going to start off with introductions, like I just mentioned, introducing our panelists. Then we're going to jump into understanding the Ivy League and Ivy Plus schools. And then we'll dive into the Ivy League Plus expectations and your application strategy. And then general application requirements. And then top tips for maximizing your chances of acceptance. And then we'll jump into a Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can either hang on to them until we get to this moment or just type them in the chat box and we will answer them at designated Q&A section. I also want to flag that this webinar will be emailed out to you after it's finished or the next day. So if you missed anything or if you want to just go back and review, we'll be sending that out to you. Okay, so I will just bring it over to our panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves. This is Jennifer and Pam. Jennifer, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jennifer, and I've been with Quad for several years now. I've been in college admissions for about 5 or 6 years. Prior to working with Quad, I directed a college guidance program in my home state of Maryland. And before that was directing study abroad programs at colleges and universities across the US, notably Washington University in St. Louis. Got my undergraduate degree from in English and East Asian Studies from Harvard, and then did my master's degree and graduate work abroad in Tokyo, Japan. And I've had the privilege in the past few years of helping students get into every Ivy and Ivy Plus institution. And I'm delighted to be with you this evening to share how you might be among those students in your future.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Pam. I also went to Harvard as an undergrad. I studied computer science before getting my PhD in neuroscience at Stanford. I've been on the undergraduate admissions committee for both Harvard and Stanford, most recently at Stanford, where I also did my postdoc and was a clinical faculty member in neuroscience and psychiatry. I used to teach in Stanford Pre-Collegiate Studies, which is where I first got to know high schoolers. And I mentored many of them through things like ISEF, which is the science fair, and Regeneron. And I'm very excited to be meeting Quad students.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, so let's jump into understanding the Ivy League and Ivy Plus schools.
Absolutely. So what are the Ivy League schools? This is a very concrete answer, unlike the Ivy Plus schools that change every couple of years in the rankings. The Ivy League is comprised of 8 private research institutions. They're all located in the Northeast, and they are renowned for their academics, their very tough admission standards, and also sort of an association with social exclusivity, great networking, alumni connections, and career opportunities.
So there are 8 Ivy Leagues: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Penn, Brown, Columbia, Cornell, and Dartmouth.
And each of these schools is sort of located in a different kind of feel with the campus. Harvard is right in the middle of Cambridge. Princeton is, in a very small college town and has more of a real campus feel, very different architecture there. The University of Pennsylvania is right in the middle of Philadelphia. Columbia is right in the middle of Upper West Side Manhattan. Cornell is very rural, and Dartmouth probably leads the group in its rural location. So it's also important to consider the location of each of these schools. As you can see here with the admission statistics, they're selective and only getting more selective. Each year, the percentage of students admitted gets smaller and smaller. Notably, I believe it was today, if not yesterday, Harvard announced that it is going back to requiring standardized testing, joining Yale and Dartmouth and Brown and a number of other schools that have come out in recent months, moving away from the test optional format. So for those of you who are juniors, and you might be surprised by this news, it's definitely important to register for your SAT or ACT tests right away. For those of you who are younger students in high school, you've got lots of time left to be able to prep for that. But just look at the scores here. We have, 1580 is the new floor of the top 25% of students admitted to these institutions. So the idea here when you're looking at this average range is you don't aim for the middle, you aim for the upper end. And the middle is not even going to be the 50% mark. The 50% mark, while commonly not released, is much higher towards the upper scores. You can also see here the US News rankings. For those of you that put a lot of stock in rankings, there are pluses and minuses in terms of the criteria that are used to determine schools' rankings. And the average unweighted GPA is also listed there for your reference.
So the Ivy Plus schools are schools that are not quite part of the Ivy League. So the Ivy League, I think most people probably know this, is actually a sporting conference. And there are some schools that are outside of that. For example, Stanford and MIT are not part of the Ivy League. So most of them are also located in the Northeast, whereas the Ivy Plus schools are located all across the country.
And a sampling of Ivy Plus schools, as I mentioned, this changes year on year, but these institutions are commonly in the top rankings for Ivy Plus. And the idea here with this terminology is that the schools offer just about everything that an Ivy League does. They're just outside of that top 8. So excellent research opportunities, obviously highly intellectual atmospheres. The University of Chicago is renowned for that atmosphere, and great pre-professional programs at Duke and Northwestern and Hopkins and Vanderbilt. These are some of the top schools to go to if you're looking to be a pre-med student going on to medical school. They have excellent placement rates for medical school programs.
So the admission statistics at the Ivy Plus schools are fairly similar to the Ivy League. You'll see that Stanford is, well, we don't report the acceptance rates anymore, but I think as of last reporting, it was a little under 4%. And the rest of the schools in the Ivy Plus are similar. They're also similar in terms of their average SAT score range or ACT score range. I will say, though, that to provide context to some of the test optional policies or lack thereof that are coming out, that the reason why they're doing that is we're looking at test scores when we're reading applications in the context of your school and your region. So meaning if you are not at the 75th percentile for these schools, please note that we do look at context. It's very important. And so it doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply or that you're not a competitive applicant if you're not in the 75th percentile.
Okay, so now let's touch on the expectations and application strategy for Ivy League and Ivy League Plus schools.
So the cornerstones of a successful application include academic excellence, intellectual curiosity, leadership and initiative, and fit with the institution. When I was doing alumni interviewing for Harvard, the intellectual curiosity piece was really highly valued. And it was, 1 in 100 students that we met with that had the real curiosity and engagement in their field to be able to just talk for hours about what they were interested in researching, what they were wanting to study at college, and to have done some of that work already, not just to frame it as a future interest, but to be able to narrate research that the student's already done. So that's something that you can definitely explore. You can do that independently. You can do that under the guidance of a faculty member. I've had students do independent research at a local community college where they were able to get great hands-on mentoring in the STEM fields and other fields. So it's really a wide range of opportunities that are open to you to kind of make your own mark and make yourself distinctive and stand out in the application process. Also to have leadership and initiative shown not just as a result of like leading a club, being student body president, captain of your sports team, first violin in the orchestra, whatever your jam is. But where you can really shine is if you recognize that your school doesn't have an activity or an organization that would really benefit the school and that you're interested in doing. And so you start it independently on your own. I was just working with a student last week who has started a HOSA chapter for pre-med students at her school because there wasn't one previously. And so she didn't let that stop her. She worked with the teachers and figured out how to start a chapter, and now gets to say that she's the head and the founder of that organization at her school. Then especially this year for my admits, when in the IB round and IB plus schools, it was very, very important for the student to articulate, first to feel that sense of excitement and fit with the institution, and then to be able to articulate it in their application essays. I had students who, maybe 3 or 4 years ago would have gotten into multiple Ivy League institutions, that this year they got into a fewer number, not all across the board Ivy admits, but the ones they were admitted to were their first choice schools and the ones that they had been able to communicate that passion for. So those are some tips that I have for you as you're setting out to prepare for applications to these schools.
So in terms of application strategy, the first step is to do a self-assessment, which we do as counselors at Quad, and some research, thinking about what will be a good fit for you and being honest about what it is that you're looking for. It's as much a two-way street as it is colleges seeking students. You're also trying to find your next home for the next 4 years. So the baseline or the foundation of the entire application process is academic excellence, followed by your extracurricular involvement, and then your essays. So bringing to life all of your activities and having your voice in the process. So this comes through your personal statement, all the supplemental essays that schools ask about, if they have them. And then your letters of recommendation are a proxy because we can't be with you in the classroom. So we ask your counselor and your teachers to tell us what you're like in the classroom, what kind of contributions you make, what comments you have, how you change the conversation when you're in the classroom. And then being very careful about paying attention to application timing and deadlines. I would say that we start with students a lot earlier than they think that they would be starting, for example, over the summer for a November 1 or December or January deadline. And then, of course, the reason why we do that is because we want to leave time for a lot of feedback and revision and sitting with the essays and coming back to them and revisiting to make sure that they are representative of you and your voice throughout the process.
Okay, now we're going to discuss general application requirements.
So since these schools are looking for academically strong students, you definitely want to perform at a high level. And keep in mind that when we talk about academic rigor and academic excellence, it's not just your GPA, it's that you've maximized your choice of, and you've just chosen and selected the most rigorous courses that are offered at your institution. So maybe your high school is an IB, an international baccalaureate institution. And if you're going to be interested in applying for these top schools, it's important that you do the diploma program. It's important that you choose your HL courses so that they match up with your intended major. Likewise, if your school offers a range of AP courses, it's important to take those in areas where you're going to be looking to major in college. You don't have to take every single AP course that your school offers. It's not possible. I talk to students all the time. We're like, I have to take 16 APs. The days of like taking an AP to take an AP, in my opinion, are not, that's not where we are right now. They are very useful to use as a measure. And certainly if you score well and the college policies allow, you are able to, get advanced credit in the school and sometimes place out of certain requirements for graduation. But you shouldn't feel pressured to take on so many AP courses, especially early on in your sophomore year, that your grades are going to suffer. You have to have that balance of like performing at a high standard as reflected in a very high GPA, while also engaging in that very rigorous coursework. So the Common App is accepted by all of these schools. And the Common App allows you to apply to up to 20 schools. You don't have to apply to 20 schools. It's often not necessary for you to apply to 20 schools, but that's what you're able to do through the Common App. And each of the schools that we're talking about this evening is available to you through the Common App. And what that means, if you don't already know and aren't engaged in the process already, is that you are able to fill out one activity list. You're able to write one main essay. Your recommendations come in centrally, and then they get sent to all the schools that you're applying to. And then, as Pam mentioned earlier, the schools do have supplemental essays, and those have to be carefully crafted and researched so that they're a great fit for what the prompts are asking at the different institutions. As we mentioned before, not all schools are currently requiring SAT and ACT scores, but we expect that that trend is only going to go in the direction of schools wanting to see test scores in the future. So do keep that in mind. And then while not all schools release their GPAs, many do, and institutions all are required to report what's called data for what's called the common data set. Sometimes that gets buried on an Office of Institutional Research website. Sometimes it's more readily available, but you can review those statistics and see what the school is reporting about their incoming freshman class.
So in terms of other application requirements, the letters of recommendation are required by most private schools. I live out here on the West Coast, and the UC, or the University of California system, does not, but most other schools do. You want to spend time asking the right teachers to write you letters of recommendation, as well as your counselor at school. So these very much enhance your application and can give us a sense of who you are and offset or give context to your grades and your extracurriculars, and tell us anything else that maybe you didn't reveal in your portion of the application. The other weighing factor are your essays. So this is the one chance that you have in the application to have your voice. And these essays are required and can give the admissions committee extra details about you as a person. You want to make sure that you give us details that aren't included in other parts of your application. So oftentimes students end up writing an extended resume, is what I call it, the I did this, and I did this, and I did this essay. That's really not what we're looking for. We're really looking for you to tell us a story, to tell us other details about your life that we couldn't have gleaned from looking at your activities list, the additional information, or that maybe your teachers wouldn't have revealed.
Yeah, and it is also important when you're crafting your personal essays for the supplemental essays for each school that you don't duplicate information that you've already shared in your personal essay. So that can get a little bit complicated sometimes because you might have a research project that's been very important to you. You might have started a nonprofit. You might have had a very impactful internship along the way that you want to talk about. And some of the school's supplemental questions are going to ask for that material, and some of them aren't. So I've even worked with students who, after we've looked at their schools and the range of supplemental essay questions that are being asked and the information that the student wants to communicate, they've decided to write 2 different personal statements. It's meant a lot more work, but then they could customize the application and be able to make sure that they're communicating their research or internship or academic interests in their personal statement if it's not going to be asked for in the supplemental essays. When you're applying to a research university, you want to make that narrative really clear. So there's a lot of different strategies and tips that we can offer to help guide you through the sometimes convoluted landscape of doing the college application process to these schools. I just wanted to note that.
Okay, so what are the top tips for maximizing your chances of acceptance?
So here are some necessary but not sufficient tips. So these will not guarantee you admission, but it certainly does help. As I mentioned before, academic excellence is very key, not defined only as scores, not just a straight A, not just a 1600 or a 36, but that you have really engaged in whatever field of interest you have, and to the extent that your school offers it. And if you are so gifted in math that you work through your high school's curriculum and you have no more courses to take, then you take courses at the local community college that are open to you and you keep going with your math studies. Or you are very passionate about environmental science, and so maybe your school offers AP Environmental Studies, maybe it doesn't. But if it doesn't, and that's your field of interest, you make it a point to go ahead and find opportunity to study your field of interest in whatever way makes the most sense for you. Sometimes it can be a summer course if that's the only way that you're able to do it as well. So you really want to be able to demonstrate, not just by your essay statement saying I'm interested in chemistry. You want to show deep engagement with research, with the subject matter, lots of opportunities that you've made possible for yourself to further your knowledge and understanding in that particular field. And then, yes, again, back to the standardized tests. These are becoming more and more a cornerstone of applications. So get ready in that. It's very important to note that if you are a student who receives accommodations at your high school and you have that documentation available at your school, you are able to request those testing accommodations through the College Board or through the ACT testing organization. That needs to be done through your school. It's not something that you as an individual can request. And it does take several months. I have had several of my students who did navigate that process successfully. They just needed 2 or 3 months in advance of the testing date to arrange that. So it's important to be aware of that and to be taking the necessary steps prior to, like, a month before, when it suddenly dawns on you that, oh my gosh, I need to, have more time, or I need to have a quiet testing environment, whatever it might be. Make sure you allow time for that. Similarly, don't walk into the test cold. We want you to take plenty of opportunities to prepare for the test. And then there are lots of resources on the College Board website for doing practice tests. It's important to time yourself when you're doing these so that you really have a pretty accurate experience of what it's going to be like. Obviously, the SAT just moved over to digital, and there have been we've heard a lot of feedback from our students who did the March digital testing version, and I'm sure you all have either personal experience or friends who are giving their feedback as well. So there are these kinds of changes that come up, and you need to be prepared for those.
So other tips for maximizing your chances are to participate in extracurriculars. So outside of your academics, all these schools are residential schools for the most part, and they want to know how you're going to contribute to the community of the college. How will you engage outside of the classroom? So this means sports, clubs, community service, research projects, the arts, or any other interests that align with and showcase your unique talents. The extracurricular list, or the Common App activities list, is really where we see where your passions, speak to us. They tell us something about you. They tell us something about your fit with the institution. And then back to letters of recommendation, you want to try to obtain really strong letters of recommendation. Like I said before, these can really tip the profile or tip your application in the right direction. They give us a lot of insights and perspectives from the individuals who have worked closely with you and taught you for many years. They can attest to your ability, your character, your potential for success, how other faculty members view you, how your community at school views you.
And then our last overall tip is, again, to be really focusing in on your personal essays as an opportunity to communicate your unique voice and perspective. You want to have these essays be very compelling and reflect aspects of your personal story, what makes you you, your motivations, your goals, and to really share some opportunities that and experiences that have helped you grow as a student and as a person. You want to make sure that as you're writing, that you go back and read the prompt. You would be surprised how many times we start writing and we think we're answering the prompt and we've only answered half the prompt. Or we go back and we're like, oh my gosh, I really just completely missed what they were really asking for. So when I'm working with my students, and maybe this kind of writing is very new to you, it is for a lot of students. How do I talk about myself and highlight my strengths without sounding braggy or sounding weird? And I have all kinds of strategies and suggestions for helping students through that process. We work one-on-one to customize whatever is going to be the best way forward for each student. It's important to know that when you're writing a first draft, it's going to be rough. No one sits down and writes their final draft when they sit down and write their first one. And you're going to revise it. You're going to go back and rework it. And you might want to have a few people involved in that process. We just don't want it to be too many, because if you have like 7 people helping you with your essays, number one, you're going to lose your voice. Number two, you're going to have so many different people telling you what to do, it's going to get very confusing. So keep it to a few trusted advisors, your quad coach, and keep it, reasonable as you're working through that process. It can be really fun. Once you get the hang of it, you definitely sort of figure out how to write in this style. And I've seen some of my students really enjoy the process, and many of them have looked back at the first essays they wrote when we get to the, October, November polishing round. And they're like, wow, that was really rough back then. I've really come a long way. So it's also a great skill that you get to learn that you can use in the future if you're applying for scholarships for study abroad, or you're going to be going on to do Fulbright and competitive applications after school, your graduate school applications. It's a skill that you're going to use throughout your life.
Okay, thank you so much for that insightful conversation. I know we all learned a lot, and we've reached the Q&A section of our webinar. So I know there's already been some questions kind of trickling throughout the webinar. So thank you for those questions. If you have any relevant on-topic questions to ask our panelists, please do so in the Q&A chat box. But right now we'll go ahead and get started with the ones that were already asked. The first one is a housekeeping one that I can answer, actually. Will this presentation or recording be shared among attendees? Yes, it will. We will be emailing this recording out tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. We have a question from Vidya. What about in Australia where no AP courses are offered? Do we need to take them externally?
I can take that one because I'm actually from Australia. I grew up there. So I'd say no, you don't. We don't expect you to. So the Australian curriculum is just fine. Doing the HSC or the VCE or whatever you've got in your state is fine. We don't expect students to take APs or IB or curricula that are not available to them locally. So you don't have to worry about taking APs or something else if it's not available to you, which in Australia is not commonly available.
Great, thanks so much. Question from Dorothy. Dorothy, my son has an unweighted GPA of 99.26. How does that translate?
Well, depending on the school's scale, if it's 100, then he's doing quite well.
Okay, we've got a question from Jenny. I did bad in my freshman year and got a 3.3 GPA unweighted, but I got a 3.9 GPA for 10th grade. Will that help me out? Do I have to worry too much about freshman year?
And that depends on the institution. For the University of California schools, they don't even count the freshman GPA at all. So they will just look at your sophomore and junior year grades. And every admissions officer likes to see a trend that goes up. If there's a little bit of a bumpy start in freshman year, that can happen for a variety of reasons. You're moving to a new school, there's a whole new level of expectations, and maybe some of the courses that were in the mix for you in freshman year weren't the best fit, and you made different choices going forward. So in the Common App, there is a section termed additional information, and you have the ability there to be able to explain and contextualize a rough start to ninth grade, or any other issues that happened. Certainly in the last several years, we've all been contextualizing pandemic grades, and for the students that were in online learning, that it just didn't suit them. There are all kinds of issues that can come up with your performance academically, as long as you can explain it. And in general, as long as there's an upward trajectory, it's something that shouldn't be a barrier to you. You just have to maintain your focus academically going forward, finishing out this year well, and doing the best that you can next year as well.
Awesome. Another question from Jenny. Can I ask a sports coach to write me a recommendation?
So again, it depends on the college. For example, at Penn, they allow you to substitute a letter from a teacher, from a coach. But I would say that for the most part, universities want to have teachers writing the letters of recommendation, because you're going to college to be a student, and you might be an athlete, but the coach wouldn't have anything to say about your performance in the classroom, which is why we ask for teacher letters of recommendation instead of coaches. Yeah. But again, it depends.
And one of the ideal individuals to ask to write a letter could be if you've had someone as a teacher in your junior year who's also been an advisor to one of the clubs that you're in. And so that individual teacher has seen you both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, maybe has worked with you over several years and has seen your growth as a student. So those can be really, really impactful letters when a teacher has seen you in those various contexts.
Great. We have a question from Raquel. Could you give us an idea of what proportion of students are legacy admissions, athletes, early action / early decision versus regular admission?
Pam, how's your crystal ball?
So it varies. In that one. Yeah, it varies. Go ahead.
It varies by school and it varies by year. So this past year, it was quite interesting because my students who applied early decision to Cornell, we worked in October. We got the essays turned in, the whole application done well in advance of November 1. Okay, we've got that done, moving right along. Meanwhile, the Cornell faculty were up in upstate New York meeting and talking amongst themselves. And at the end of November, announced that they were going to reduce the number of admits through the early decision pool. Now, wouldn't that have been lovely to know in September and not the end of November? So there are things like that that happen every year that you just can't see coming. And so my student in that case was not surprisingly deferred to the regular decision round and was then admitted. Regular decision. It was just a little bit of a bumpier ride than we anticipated. So there are, each school has a different approach to how much emphasis, and sometimes not at all, they place on whether immediate family have also attended the university. Athletes, similarly, recruitment varies by sport and by year on that front. And athletes, yeah, it's just a mixed bag. So Pam, what would you add into that?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that some colleges have come out and said that they will not look at legacy admissions at all. MIT, Hopkins, some of the smaller liberal arts colleges have come out and said that in light of the Supreme Court decision this past year. MIT's never considered legacy, and then the UCs don't really look at it either. The University of California system, sorry. And then in terms of athletes and early action, there's so many statistics buried in this question, because I would say that for the most part, depending on whether the school has a restrictive early action or single choice early action versus regular early action or early decision, the numbers in general are larger during the regular admissions round. So I'll give you a local school here, Santa Clara University. In their early action round, they might have hundreds. I think it's something like 300 or 800. But then the regular round, they might have 30,000. So it's usually the numbers are slanted in that way, meaning there are much fewer applicants in the early round versus the regular round. And then in terms of legacy and athletes, it can be, depending on the college, and I don't want anyone to be alarmed by this, but up to 50% of the class might be taken in the early round due to athletic admissions, early action / early decision, and all else. I'll give you another example. Chicago in the last couple of years, they have every single type of admissions decision out there. They have ED1, they have ED2, they have early action, and then regular decision. So they filled up to 90% of their class from ED1, ED2, and EA. So there's a lot of variation, and that's why we have a tough time answering this question, because it depends.
Exactly, it depends. And some of the IB Plus schools that offer early decision too, I'm thinking of Hopkins, WashU, Vanderbilt. When you look at that common data set there and you see how many students were admitted in each of those rounds and then how many students were admitted RD, and you do the math, early decision 1 and 2 can make up 50 to 60% of the incoming class at those schools. And then furthermore, they're not going to take 15 students from your high school. So if there's a lot of students at your high school who are applying to this IB and this IB and this IB Plus school, and then they all get in, it's even more challenging for you to have a regular decision admit to those schools or an ED2 admit to those schools. So you need to be thinking both about what capacity the university has that you're interested in, and also the metrics from your own individual high school.
Great. We've got a question from Sanvi. How do we know which colleges prefer which APs and extracurricular classes? Okay, maybe rephrase that, Sanvi. Maybe we're just not getting that. So if you could just type in your question again and maybe clarify, that would be wonderful. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and just jump to the next question. Question from Rupali. What's the right time to start making the college list? My son is a sophomore going to junior year in fall 2024 and graduating high school in 2026. What's the right time for him to start doing his college list?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of data-driven college list building. So we can start making a dream list of schools that we might like to be able to apply to as early as sophomore year. But until you have your standardized testing scores to the best of your ability, and until we know what your junior fall GPA cumulative is going to be, we need those metrics in order to really strategize what's going to be a super reach, a high target, a low target, et cetera. And so we really engage in that list building process in your junior spring, and take deep dives into your areas of interest and do the curricular match, and then start building a holistic list for you that has a good range of target and reach and likely schools. But doing that much before the spring semester of your junior year, we just don't have the information that's needed.
Okay, question from Michelle. If you apply to a few Ivy schools, how many safety schools should you apply to, and how do you know it's a safety school for you?
So again, it depends on your statistics, but let's say that you have a 10 school list. I usually recommend that students have, say, 2 or 3 high reaches, some target colleges, say 4 of them out of 10, and then 4 safeties. But you can play with those numbers, and that's kind of rough. And then in terms of determining what's a safety school, I know that gets harder and harder to figure out every year because the admissions rates are going down and each school shifts. But I would say you want to look at their testing. rely on your counselor because we have expertise and intuition in terms of what schools like what kind of students, in terms of figuring out your safeties. And then, of course, the state schools are really good backups for a lot of students too. And then, Jennifer, if you have anything to add, because I know I didn't really give a comprehensive answer.
Yeah. So I think that it is challenging for those likely admits, or the, really knowing what is going to be not just a school that you can get into, but a school that you can, like you're very certain you can get admitted to and you want to attend. So that's, I don't ever recommend just going out and applying to 4 safety schools that you have no interest in whatsoever. Other students need those schools. For them, they're a target school. So it's important to really be thinking about schools that you're interested in and also can be a backup. For my high achieving students, it's different than my students who have a 3.5 or 3.2 GPA when we're building our college list, in terms of the number of likely schools that we need. When we're working with very, very high achieving students, defined as we've been mentioning with scores and rigor and leadership and all the things, it's sufficient to have just 1 or 2 safety schools. Maybe there's a guaranteed admit university in your home state. And so that can be one of your safety schools and one other one, and you're good, because you only need to get into 1 school. So then you can apply to a whole range of Ivies and Ivy Plus schools. You can maximize your chances and lock things down by doing an early decision to a high target school. There's all kinds of ways to plan out your strategy. It's sort of your level of risk tolerance and our assessment of where you can really shine and be considered for a strong candidate at a given university. I do want to address some questions that popped up in the chat to make sure that we get to Debbie and Vanessa's questions about how I was describing the SAT ranges that were on our charts. So a lot of times students will look at that range and they'll see, as long as I get above this score and somewhere, close to the other score, I'll be fine. It's not that it's a top ceiling of a score. When you see that upper score of a 1580 or 1570 or 1550, whatever it might be, that score is the 75th percentile. And 25% of the students who got admitted to the school, the top 25% of students, got that score or higher. So that's the way we want you to think about that when we talk about the score ranges.
Amazing. Thank you. Another question from Vanessa. If we are interested in engaging Quad for your services, how early should we consider working with you?
I have 7th graders and 8th graders. So it can be any time from middle school on. Students will come to us in 9th grade or 10th grade. We have students come in junior summer for help with the applications. It's really, the earlier the better, because we can help you craft your, explore different areas of interest academically and extracurricularly, and craft an effective narrative and really explore those interests and fit with you in depth. Your counselor gets to know you really well. Likewise, you get to know them well and can benefit from their expertise in helping to set up summer opportunities and research opportunities that are going to benefit you in the long run.
Great. Question from Carlos. Do Ivies give full rides?
No, they don't. They do meet, however, financial aid if that's what you need. So there's no merit scholarship per se. There are small grants that they give out for, say, the top students. So Columbia, for instance, will give out Rabbi Scholar Awards for students pursuing research, but they don't give out full rides in the sense that they're not merit scholarships. And it's very much dependent on your expected family contribution.
Okay, question from Rajesh. What is the impact of volunteer hours on your application?
Volunteer hours are important. Almost every student who's excelling, and Ivy bound, is going to have the Presidential Volunteer Service Award level of volunteer hours. And if you're looking for, a BSMD, or you're looking pre-med, you're going to have a lot of volunteer hours in clinics and hospitals and the like. So it's important to have. It doesn't really differentiate you from other applicants, in my view. And I think that it's important to just look at that as sort of like, okay, good grades are a baseline, good test scores are a baseline, the requisite volunteer experience is a baseline. But then what can you do that will be, unique to you, that will combine your interest in helping your community with some of your academic interests? And where can you give back to your community in a way that's going to like deepen your engagement with the field? Because we learn a lot when we have to teach something that maybe we've only studied before. So if you're in a position to be tutoring and helping other students learn subjects that you're very skilled at, that can be one way where your volunteering and your academic interests overlap. And then one of my students a few years ago, she got very passionate about helping immigrants, newly arrived refugees in her community, because she and her family had come through that journey as well. And she recognized how many people were having issues with filing their taxes properly. And she was not about to go become a CPA. She's a sophomore and junior in high school, but her friend's family ran a tax preparation company, and they developed a little nonprofit arm to that where they provided translation and all kinds of consultation services for the community. And it was really a standout effort on her part and was very helpful when she was applying to schools.
I wanted to add something to that because I have I think a lot of people focus on the number of hours, like the 100 hours you need for the Presidential Gold Award or something like that, but it's not a checkbox. So I think the assumption is, oh, the more hours I have, the better it must look. And oftentimes I find that students don't really meaningfully engage. So it sounds like Jennifer's student was very meaningfully engaged in the cause that mattered a whole lot to her. But a lot of students will say, well, I did a little bit of beach cleanups and park cleanups, and I volunteered at the bank. But if you ask them, how did you grow and evolve as a result of doing this? They really can't say how or why. And I think it's more important to colleges that you show how you've grown as a result of doing this, despite, if you've spent 100 hours doing something, but it hasn't really developed you, I think that's not what they're looking for. Jennifer, can you hear her?
No, we've lost your sound.
Oh, now we can.
Okay. Thank God. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. Question from Jenny. Can I let my Spanish teacher and ELA teacher write me the recommendation even though I'm going to major in engineering?
No. I'm going to say for engineering, you need to have a STEM teacher write you the letter. And maybe you'll be benefited if the school will allow you to do 3 letters, and you'll be able to submit both of those 2 from your preferred teachers that know you well and could write amazingly. But if you're trying to get into a selective engineering school, you've got to have someone who can speak to your quantitative abilities, in my opinion. Pam, what do you think?
Actually, so schools like MIT require that you have a humanities teacher as well as a STEM teacher, because I think most STEM students applying to MIT are really, 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 really strong at STEM, but then you'll see their grades in Spanish and English or history, coming in a little bit lower, and they want both. So right. Some schools want both, but I would say that Jennifer is absolutely correct in that there should be one also from a STEM teacher if you're going to be in engineering.
Yeah. The general advice is one from humanities and social sciences and one from math, CS, the science. And then there are some fields that can kind of go in either direction when we need to have them go one way or another. And so we can work with you on that and customize it. And some schools are a little bit more flexible. But yeah, for engineering, you've got to have STEM.
Amazing. Question from Priyam. Can I receive a recommendation letter from my freshman year teacher?
Nope. Hard no from me. Pam, what do you say?
I get this from students a lot. I would say if you don't have any contact with that teacher since freshman year, that would be tough. The reason why colleges are asking for letters of recommendation from the most recent teacher is presumably you've grown and changed and evolved and matured in the time since you were a freshman. And so your 11th grade teachers probably are the nearest proxy for what you'll be like in the classroom when you enter as a freshman at college. However, sometimes students say, I continue to keep in touch with this teacher. I did outside coursework or I engaged in an independent study with them. I would say that's okay. But it's a little bit odd that the only person that you can think of is from freshman year.
Yeah. As you're crafting your application, you want to at all costs avoid raising red flags. And if I were reading that application, I would be concerned as to why there wasn't a junior year teacher in that field that could speak to that student's strengths in the college application process.
Okay, question from Alexander. Does doing certain sports weigh more than other sports on your application? For example, I've heard fencing perhaps looks better on college applications than other sports.
Jennifer, you want to tackle that one?
I want to hear what you have to say.
So I would say that there are certain sports that get recruited or are recruited for, and then others that are not. I played rugby. It was not a recruitable sport. I don't think that it would have mattered in any case to my application whatsoever. And then if you're coming in as an athlete and assuming that you get a letter of intent, then obviously that will be a strong factor in your admissions decision. But it really depends on the sport in terms of, but if it's something like badminton, I don't think any school recruits for that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And different schools are going to have, some schools are going to have equestrian programs or golf or whatever. So, you obviously have to be savvy about what you love to do and what the school specializes in.
Okay, there are a couple questions about the minimum score, like the average SAT scores for Ivy and Ivy League Plus schools. I think we might have touched on this, but I guess good to reiterate. So Debbie asks, if most of them are 1580, does it mean that if I don't have that, should I not apply?
It does not mean that. It means that statistically, the top quarter of students admitted had those scores.
Okay, question from Elaine. Do they look at sophomore grades?
Yes, they do.
Okay, question from Lava. My school offers no AP classes. Is it still good to take them, specifically those that align in my field of interest?
So there are a number of schools of various calibers, some top caliber, some middle of the road caliber, that for whatever reasons have chosen not to offer AP courses. And you have two choices there. You can engage in your school's academic curriculum, and that is that. And some students of mine will elect to do self-study outside of that and then take an AP exam especially in their field of interest, where we know that they're going to be able to manage that additional workload outside of their academic and extracurricular and family obligations and manage all of that successfully. So it really is a customized decision.
Okay, question from Hyun. Is early admission better than regular admission?
Again, it depends. I'm not sure if you're talking about early decision versus early action. And it depends also on where you're at with your application. Sometimes students come to us late and they're not ready to go by November 1, and you might want to wait. Or sometimes they're waiting for grades to come in that might be stronger. So let's say that your junior year was a little bit more mixed in terms of your grades. You might want to wait for a really strong fall, senior fall to submit your application, in which case maybe waiting till regular decision is the time or is the best choice for you. So again, I know it's frustrating, but it depends, and we need context to really answer that question.
Yeah, it's important to know that early action doesn't give you any benefit other than early notification. It doesn't statistically enhance your odds of acceptance. Early decision does boost you up in and give you better odds, both because there's a smaller applicant pool and because the universities understandably love the idea of not having to play enrollment management yield games. And if they give one admission, they're going to get one student in the incoming class and be done. So for those reasons, early decision can be a really smart way to go. However, if you're a California resident and your dream is to attend one of the UC University of California system schools that don't have an early decision process, they have an early deadline for their regular decisions applications because of the volume that they're dealing with. So you submit your application in November and you're not going to hear until much, much later in the year. You're not going to get the December 15th notification date. So there are reasons for not doing an ED because you want to hear back from those schools that you're really hoping to be able to attend. So again, we customize the strategy, we work with you to make the best plan for you.
Okay, question from Mar. Do IVs take students with IEPs, I guess individual education plans?
Absolutely. There's no discrimination based on having a disability of any kind. And a lot of them have offices that you can get in touch with to discuss how they will support students with IEPs. But it is your responsibility to contact them. Meaning, unlike in high school where, you work with your teachers and your counselor to submit an IEP or to come up with one, in college, they very much depend on you to go approach the office and let them know. You're declaring and letting them know that you require accommodations.
Right. And your IEP doesn't automatically move from high school to college. You need to initiate that process, as Pam said.
Okay, we have room for a couple more questions before we have to say goodnight. But a question from Debbie, what about restricted early action? Does it give you any advantage like ED?
Do you want me to take that one? I will say from Harvard and Stanford standpoint, no, it does not. However, that doesn't mean that other schools don't give you some sort of a boost. I'm just speaking from the perspective of having been on those admissions committees, but it did not give you an advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The nice thing when you apply REA from the student's perspective is that if you're given admission, you don't have to commit to that school. So in the scenario I outlined earlier, say you have a regular decision school that you're really hoping works out for you for a variety of reasons to be able to attend, and you submit an REA application, then you're able to get that notification but not be bound to accept the offer if it comes.
Amazing. Okay, I think that's all we really have time for today. I hope everyone learned a lot from this webinar. I know I did. Special thank you to Jennifer and Pam for really having an insightful outlook and answering these questions for us. I know there's still a couple questions in the chat box. So if your question did not get answered, please feel free to respond to the email or contact us at Quad Education. There's an email on our website and you can contact us. I know there were a couple questions as well as about how we get started. So you can visit us at quadeducation.com to get started on your journey for help to get into your preferred college. Also, I know there's another question that I feel need to answer. This will get emailed out afterwards. So tomorrow you can expect to see this in your mailbox, just a recording to review for, oh my gosh, I'm losing my words here. For you to review. So other than that, I hope you guys have a great night. I hope you guys learned a lot, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Bye.